Tourism is important to San Angelo. In 2012, travel spending in San Angelo totaled $219 million. That was a 20% growth over 2011, and according to Texas Research, we were one of the top growth cities in the state. The average travelers to San Angelo travel 353 miles by auto and spend $170 a day. Tourism employed 3,240 people in 2012 and gave a total local tax revenue of $3.7 million. Hooray for tourism. And here's the best part. Each one of your households would have to pay an additional $840 in taxes if it were not for tourism in your community. For most of us, roads and highways are simply a means to a destination. But for 40 years, the back roads of Texas have been home and office for Texas Country Reporter Bob Phillips. He was born in Dallas, but spent much of his youth growing up on the family farm near Lake Texoma. It was there that Bob lived with and learned from the folks he calls the salt of the earth. His Texas Country Reporter television series is a celebration of the Texas way of life and a tribute to the real heroes of our time. Bob started his television career at KDFW-TV Channel 4 in Dallas while he was a student at SMU. Bob's backroad travels have lasted 40 years, and Texas Country Reporter is now seen in all television markets in Texas. He is a 1973 graduate of Southern Methodist University, where he received a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree with a major in broadcast and fine art. In 1976, he received a Master of Liberal Arts degree from SMU. He has been honored with numerous awards for his work, from AP, UPI, Dallas Press Club, Telly Awards, Texas Historical Commission, World Fest International, and the coveted Television Emmy Awards, and he is member of the Emmy organization's Silver Circle. He is the owner and president of Phillips Productions, which produces the TV series, The Texas Country Reporter. And I'm thrilled to say that San Angelo has been a top Texas town on Texas Country Reporter since May of this year. So it gives me great pleasure today to introduce Bob Phillips.
Y'all forgive me, but I'm still reeling over the rented wedding dresses. Where's the guy that does this? Can you raise? Does anybody? Why didn't I think of that? I mean, this huge expense, and you can rent. Maybe this is old. Other people do it, but I've never heard of that before, and I just think it's genius. But Pamela, thank you very much. I've got to tell you that I was sitting here eating just a minute ago, and Pamela wasn't touching her meat, and she shared with us, don't hide, it's going to come out sometime. She shared with us that she doesn't eat barbecue. And I was so horrified that I bit my lip. So if anybody sees anything, I'm serious, if anybody sees anything running, don't be nice, just tell me, Bob, you got something running down your lip here. But we forgave her because she immediately followed it up when she saw the horrified look on my face. I told her, I think it's against the law not to eat barbecue in Texas, but I'm going to check that out. She immediately followed it up with, I love chicken fried steak. So we're going to cut her a little bit of slack on that. I've been coming to San Angelo ever since my high school days in Dallas because I went to Bryan Adams High School in Dallas, and we had quite a football program, but every year during the preseason, one of the things to do back then when I was in high school was to drive to San Angelo so that your local football team could beat the snot out of ours on your home ground, just kind of as an opener. And we always appreciated that. Back then, I think it took us like 6 or 8 hours to drive here, and we never won one game. So anyway, that was good. I drive probably more than an over-the-road trucker. But all of my driving is primarily within the state. I drive so much every year and for so many years that I think I'm pretty sure that I now personally know every DPS officer in the entire state of Texas. They've all pulled me over at least once, I think. Sometimes they're not pulling me over. Well, they may be pulling me over for my speed, but sometimes they'll share stories with me. And that happened not too long ago. I was actually driving out of San Antonio, coming out west, and I look up, and it's a familiar sight now. I don't even get that queasy feeling in my stomach anymore. It's happened so many times. I look up, and I see the lights, and I pull over, and they usually walk up, and say something like, "Oh, it's you again." But this guy comes up, and he goes, "Yeah, I've got my license, in my hand with my insurance card." I learned a long time ago, there was an officer who told me a long time ago, the way to be friends when you get stopped, especially at night, is turn on all your lights inside your car, roll all your windows down, get your license and your insurance card, put your hands on top of the wheel, which makes sense because if you were walking up to a dark car, and they really appreciate that, it's gotten me out of a lot of tickets. This guy, he walks up, it's broad daylight, he walks up, and I've got my license, and my insurance card, and he says, put that away, I'm not stopping you for anything, I wanted to tell you a story. Oh, thanks, I appreciate that. And he says, I had to tell you about this because I'm driving along, and there's this car that's in front of me, and I get behind it, and it's going incredibly slow. I mean, so slow that they're almost, I thought they were going to stop, but they just kept on going and kept on going. So I finally said, well, this is dangerous, and I pulled them over. I walked up to the car, and there were 4 little old ladies inside of this car, and the lady that was driving, she sticks her head out the window, and she's got an attitude immediately, and she says, "Why are you stopping me? Because I didn't do anything wrong." And he said, "Well, ma'am, yeah, you did. You were not driving the speed limit." She says, "I want you to know I always drive exactly what the speed limit sign says." And he said, "No, ma'am, you are going so slow down this road. Some of these trucks and these other people are just going to blow you off into the ditch, and that's just, it's not safe. You've got to drive the speed limit." She says, "Officer, I am here to tell you that I had my cruise control set. And there's the speed limit right there on that sign." He says he looked over that way, and he looked back at her and said, "Ma'am, that sign says Interstate 10. Well, at that point, she's kind of, she's red, she's embarrassed, and so I'm so sorry, I guess better get my glasses checked. And he looks and he notices that none of the other 3 ladies in there has even looked his way, much less said anything. They're all just looking straight ahead like somebody just swallowed a canary. And he says, "Ma'am, before I let you go, now, are you sure that everything's okay? I mean, these other 3 ladies, they look like they've seen a ghost or something." She says, "Don't mind them. We just got off of Highway 183. I actually did hear that from a state trooper, not exactly under those circumstances, but I did hear that. More than 40 years ago now, I left on a trip to see the small towns and the out-of-the-way places in Texas. My mother used to tell people that I never came home from that trip. And in a way, I guess that she was right about that, because I'm still out traveling around seeing the small towns and the out-of-the-way places in Texas. The reason for that trip was to find out what people outside of the big cities had to say. When I first got involved in television, I was a freshman in college, and I happened to get a job at the CBS affiliate in Dallas. I was a grunt. I did whatever it was they wanted me to do for $2 an hour back then, and I became a photographer. Got to travel for more than a decade with the Dallas Cowboys, and was on the sidelines of every game back then. Traveled on the team plane when we went out of town. Got to go to Super Bowls, and it was great. And I was a reporter also, and I got to cover politics, which was what I was really studying to do, and do a lot of other things that were pretty exciting back then. But I always had this yearning to do feature stories, and that's what I ended up doing. And so back when I hadn't worked at that TV station very long, I talked the bosses into letting me try a different kind of show, and here we are some 40 years later still doing that weekly trip around Texas. I wanted to find out what people had on their minds outside of, like I said, the big cities, because TV people back then thought if it didn't happen within a few blocks of their studio, it wasn't news. And my idea was that a lot of people live out there and they all have great stories to share. I was hoping that people not only had something to say, but they would tell me about it. And turns out they had a lot to say. They were proud of their lives. They talked about their dreams, their accomplishments, and they talked a lot about their love of this great state that we all call home. Now, in the early days when we first started traveling, we had some kind of close calls because these city boys were piled up inside of this van that was not exactly a showpiece. The TV station gave us this old Ford Econoline van that had 173,000 miles on it. And they were about to junk it when they gave this. I don't think they thought that this was going to be successful. So they gave me the keys and an old Texaco credit card and said, go out and see what you can find. Okay, we'll try this. It had one of those air conditioners, those aftermarket air conditioners that is set up on top of the van, and that didn't work. So anyway, we are going out into these places. Nobody knew what we were doing. And I remember one time I was way down in deep East Texas, down where the piney woods are growing so thick and you can't see, very, very far. You certainly can't see the horizon anywhere you are down there. And we were driving down the road and we look over and there's this beautiful scene. It's just about sunset. The sun is setting to the west off behind these pine trees with a pasture right in front of it with these beautiful cows that are just grazing. And it was just one of those really pretty scenes. And we said, we'll use that somewhere in the show. Let's stop and get that shot. We jumped out and we set everything up and camera's rolling and I'm standing there watching it and we're rolling. And all of a sudden I feel something cold at the back of my neck and the guy says, what you boys doing? And I'm so scared I didn't even turn around at first. I froze because I had a feeling I knew what this was. I said, sir, can I turn around? I turned around and this farmer is standing there and he's got that shotgun and he's still pointing it. And he says, now, start talking and tell me what it is you're doing to my cows. So I explained, I started talking real fast and I told him this is a TV camera and back then we were on film and the TV cameras were these great big giant boat anchor things and we're on this big wooden tripod and it's just a bunch of gear and it's and I'm just talking as fast as I can and we're shooting for this TV show and finally he lowers the shotgun and says, all right then, I was afraid you was going to beam my cattle up to your mothership. That is a true story. But somewhere along the way, people started recognizing what we were doing, and they started actually looking out for us, and we got to know people, and people started sharing stories with us, and we started getting letters, and then years later, when it came along, we started getting thousands and thousands of emails, and so we figured that along the way somewhere we became an accepted part of the state. We came to realize, though, that we weren't just telling stories about individual specific people. That's what we do, and our motto has always been, everyone has a story and we want to tell that story. That's what we tell ourselves when we're out traveling. But when you put all of those stories together, we knew that we were telling something bigger than that. We were telling the Texas story, the collective narrative of a state filled with great people and the valiant efforts of those great people to carve lives in the most incredible state in America. And over the almost 41-year history now, we think that body of work goes a long way in telling that story. Since we are telling the Texas story, we've come to see ourselves as ambassadors of this state and all that it has to offer. Now, I like to brag to people that 3 different governors, Ann Richards, George W. Bush, and Rick Perry have all referred to me at some point as the unofficial ambassador of state tourism. Last Wednesday, I got to spend the day with Governor Perry. He gave me a tour of the Texas State Cemetery there in Austin. By the way, if you have never been there, and most people have not, and you're in Austin, spend an hour or two and go over there. It's incredible. It is a history lesson that you won't believe. Governor Perry loves this place. He called and invited me to come down, and we ended up spending the entire day together last Wednesday. He was there to meet us at 6:30 in the morning at the cemetery, and we didn't part ways until 9 o'clock that night. So we got to have a whole day. I got to bend his ear about a whole lot of things. So, and I asked him during that, I said, Governor, you're the third governor now that is referred to me as the unofficial ambassador of state tourism. I'm wondering, what do we need to do to make that official? And he was silent for a moment, and then he kind of looked at me in the corner of his eye and said, I think we're just going to leave it like it is. So here we are. We're still doing that. But we do believe that we like to think that we're a living, ongoing message that Texas is the place to be, even if it's just for a visit. We love tourists in Texas. I'm on the Texas Tourism Industry Association Board of Directors, and have really enjoyed the last few years doing that, because I've learned, even with the TV show and all the traveling, I've learned so much about Texas tourism that I didn't know, things that I would have just guessed at before. Pamela shared some statistics with you a minute ago, and here in San Angelo, you've got something special going on. And I don't go around, I'm not a politician, so I don't go from town to town telling everybody you're the greatest. I have always had an affinity for San Angelo in this area. Ever since, like I said, you beat the snot out of us in high school football back then. I think that you have a story to tell that everybody else wishes that they had to tell. You have so much history, you have so much culture here that everybody else wishes they had. You've got a beautiful setting, and most importantly these days, you've got the right people that are telling that story with your chamber and your CVB. They are really doing an incredible job, and that's one of the reasons that that San Angelo is a top Texas town on our TV show every week. They're only at the current time 3 in the entire state, and San Angelo is one of those. So I want to commend you for that, but I want to share a few more statistics about tourism here. I think Pamela mentioned that total direct travel spending was about $243 million or something like that in 2012. For the hotel and food service people, almost $41 million of that went directly in that area. Arts, entertainment, recreation, almost $14 million. Retail, almost $9 million. Auto rental and ground transportation, almost $500,000 right here. In terms of jobs, and that's really important these days, those dollars translate into almost 2,000 jobs in accommodation and food service alone. And when you start really adding all those jobs together, you can see how important tourism is. Well, those are some great numbers. They indicate a thriving, healthy travel community right here in the San Angelo area. They are, by the way, as far as I know, record-setting numbers since that data started being kept back in 1994. It just keeps getting better as you go along. But I want to submit to you that the travel story is much greater than the one presented by the dry numbers. I think tourism is much more widespread than at first glance. There's a story that I first heard, some 20, 25 years ago, about a car dealer in Arlington, halfway there between Dallas and Fort Worth, in Arlington, Texas, that was asked by his local CVB to get involved in their tourism efforts. And the car dealer said, I don't work in tourism. I've never sold a single car to a tourist. To which the person that was soliciting his involvement said, I want you to look at those employee parking lots over at Six Flags over Texas and over at the Rangers ballpark there and tell me, where in the heck do you think those employees bought those cars? You do work in tourism, you just don't know it. Well, it's true. Tourism spreads a lot farther than we all think. To illustrate that point, years ago I took a camera crew. We traveled all over the state, and we asked people in jobs that you would not think were tourist related if they could make the point for how they worked in tourism. A commercial fisherman in Galveston told me that the fish he caught every day were sold straight to the restaurants in Galveston that served most of that fish to, you guessed it, tourists. Another guy in Jacksonville, Texas, over in East Texas, he owned a basket making company. And I said, okay, make the case for how you work in tourism. And he said, well, I make these baskets that I sell to the local tomato farmers. That's a big crop over there in Jacksonville. And a whole lot of those tomatoes are sold to a big Mexican food chain that uses them to make their salsa that goes out all over the state, and a lot of that is sold to tourists. A woman that owns a screen printing business, an embroidery company in Nederland, Texas, down in southeast part of the state, told me she works in tourism because even though her business is strictly wholesale, she prints t-shirts that are sold at a place called Buc-ee's that's all over central Texas and southeast Texas and soon to be coming out west Texas from what I heard. So I'm sure you're getting the point that in a way, almost all of us, I won't say everybody, but almost all of us are involved in some way or another in tourism, a lot more than those of us who are in this room are involved in tourism. Even if you think you're not, in lots of cases, we can make a connection to tourism dollars in just a few steps. It's kind of like that 6 degrees of separation thing where you try to connect the actor Kevin Bacon to a movie in 6 steps or less. Well, this is kind of the same way. Tourism dollars can be tracked just like that. And perhaps the bigger point is this. When tourism suffers, almost every other business suffers. If you don't believe that, go back and look at some of the times when our economy wasn't doing so well and watch what happens with tourism and what happens right after tourism takes a hit. As long as we keep tourism dollars spending, everything else seems to follow, and especially in Texas and especially in this area. So to wrap it up, I want to salute all of you that are here in this room that work in tourism, whether you know it or not. I think most here do know it. That's why you're here. Not just to the people at the San Angelo CVB and to the people in the Hotel Motel Association and all that, but to the folks at JB Automotive who repair cars and have no idea they work in tourism, to the people at Letty Boots who probably never considered that they too are in the tourism business, even to the people at the local Orkin Pest Control franchise who think there's no way that they work in tourism, but then nobody wants to stay at a hotel with bugs or eat at a restaurant with flies. So in a way, just about everybody can be said to work in tourism. We're all tourism ambassadors for San Angelo, for the great state of Texas, and we all have a job to do. I want to thank you very much for having me here today. I'm honored to be in your midst and to be back in San Angelo. I always love it. I've run into several people already in the room that I've done stories on over the years, and I've been making little notes while I'm here about several others that, and yes, by the way, Harry, we will be back at Fort Concho. We appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much for having me today.